An original story narrated exclusively for love beyond words. Clara Whitmore first understood what it meant to be necessary on the morning the solicitor arrived with rain on his hat and sympathy in his voice. The Whitmores' accounts were not merely strained. They were crumbling. In the old house on the ridge, once proud with its carved banisters and portraits that seemed to watch generations pass, had begun to feel like a stage set left behind after the play ended. Her father, once warm with stories and laughter, had grown smaller with worry, speaking in numbers and deadlines, his hands lingering too long on the mantel as if he could steady the whole world by sheer will. Clara did not cry. She had learned that tears, like fire, were expensive. Once started, they consumed more than they gave back. So she listened, steady-faced, while the solicitor explained the arrangement that had been offered. An alliance, a marriage, a solution, because that was how their society turned love into arithmetic. Lord Nathaniel Ashcroft, widowed for 3 years, needed a reputable bride to quiet certain conversations and provide stability for his estate and his young niece, who lived with him since his brother's death. In return, the Whitmores would receive what they required most: time, protection, and the preservation of their name. It was not spoken aloud, but everyone understood the unspoken part. Clara's marriage would purchase her family's survival. Her father tried, at first, to protest with a frail dignity, but his voice faltered as the word auction hung between them, unkind and accurate. Clara's mother sat rigid and pale, twisting her handkerchief as if it were the last thread holding her together. Clara lifted her chin and said, in the calm voice she used for managing household chaos, "When do I meet him?" And the relief in the room was immediate, guilty, and unmistakable. When Nathaniel Ashcroft arrived at Hawthorne Manor 2 days later, he did not bring flowers. He brought punctuality, a plain carriage, and a small leather portfolio that looked as if it contained the weight of his life neatly categorized. Clara met him in the drawing room beneath a portrait of her grandmother, whose eyes were sharp enough to judge from beyond the grave. Nathaniel was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark restraint, and his face, handsome in a way that seemed accidental rather than cultivated, held the careful stillness of a man who had trained himself not to reveal what he felt. His gaze was direct but not intimate. He bowed with exactness, greeted her parents with measured courtesy, and only then turned to Clara as if she were the central figure in a contract he intended to honor. "Miss Whitmore," he said, and his voice was low, controlled, and oddly gentle at the edges. "Thank you for receiving me." Clara noticed his hands, strong, capable, but with a faint scar at the base of the thumb, the kind of mark that suggested a life lived in duty rather than leisure. They spoke of practicalities, how quickly the wedding must occur, the necessity of a special license, the arrangements for her relocation to Ashcroft Hall, the expectations of her role. Nathaniel did not pretend at romance. He did not flatter. He did not call her beautiful or speak of destiny. Instead, he said, simply and plainly, that he would ensure her family's debts were settled, that Hawthorne Manor would remain in Whitmore hands, and that she would have autonomy within his household. He asked about her temperament, as one might ask about a steward's capabilities, not dismissively, but with seriousness. "You understand," he said, "that this marriage will be observed. It must appear steady, respectable. My estate has endured enough speculation." Clara heard, beneath the words, a careful exhaustion. Something had happened at Ashcroft Hall that had taught him caution. When he mentioned his niece, Lottie, 8 years old, solemn and sharp-eyed, something softened in his expression so briefly Clara nearly missed it. It was not the softness of a man seeking comfort. It was the softness of a man who had learned to hold love in his hands like a fragile object and feared it might break. Clara found herself answering him not with pleading or bitterness, but with a quiet promise. "I will do what is required." Nathaniel's eyes held hers for a fraction longer. "I would prefer," he replied, "that you do what is chosen." The distinction startled her, because it implied he recognized the difference and cared. The wedding took place in a small church under a sky the color of pewter. There were no crowds, no ribbons, no laughing bridesmaids. Only witnesses, signatures, and a vicar who spoke briskly as if conscious of the damp and the haste. Clara wore a simple dress in soft gray blue, her hair pinned with modest care. Nathaniel wore black and dark green, severe and elegant, and when he placed a ring on her finger, his touch was steady, almost formal. He did not kiss her mouth when the vicar pronounced them married. He brushed his lips briefly against her cheek, an act so restrained it could be mistaken for a gesture of respect rather than intimacy. Clara felt, in that moment, the strange vertigo of stepping out of her old life and into a new one without the transitional rituals that usually soften the change. She left the church as Miss Whitmore and returned to the carriage as Lady Ashcroft, and her mother watched her with a brave smile that wavered only once when the carriage door closed. As they drove away, Clara looked back at Hawthorne Manor until it disappeared behind the line of bare trees. She did not wave dramatically. She did not weep. She simply pressed her gloved hand to her chest, as if holding herself together by the quiet force of will, and turned forward toward the unknown. Ashcroft Hall was larger than Hawthorne, older, heavier with history. Its stones were darkened by age and weather, and the iron gates bore the crest of the family, an ash tree with roots like veins. Inside, the halls were wide, the ceilings high, the air faintly scented with beeswax and old wood. The staff assembled with the practiced neutrality of people trained to observe without reacting, though Clara caught whispers behind lowered eyes. She had lived long enough among servants to recognize the subtle language of class. Not cruelty, exactly, but evaluation, skepticism, and the quiet question of whether she belonged. Mrs. Pritchard, the housekeeper, greeted her with correct formality and eyes like polished stone. The butler, Mr. Hale, bowed and spoke her title as if weighing it. Nathaniel stood beside Clara, not touching her, but close enough that his presence felt like a shield. Lady Ashcroft will oversee the household arrangements as she sees fit, he said, and his voice carried just enough authority to settle the room. Clara's throat tightened with the realization that he was not merely bringing her into his home. He was placing his reputation behind hers. That night, she was shown to a suite of rooms on the east side of the second floor. They were beautiful and cold in their perfection. A fire already lit, curtains heavy with brocade, a dressing table polished to a mirror shine. Everything prepared, everything correct, everything unfamiliar. When Clara asked, carefully, where Lord Ashcroft's rooms were, Mrs. Pritchard hesitated the briefest moment before replying, "His lordship occupies the west wing." The distance was not an accident. It was a boundary. The bridal chamber, however, had been prepared in the older tradition. Candles and flowers, a bed turned down, a scattering of rose petals like a careless promise. The sight made Clara's stomach tighten, not from fear of Nathaniel as a man, but from the cruelty of expectation. She had agreed to a marriage of necessity. The room suggested a romance that did not exist. She stood at the edge of the bed, her gloves still on, as if keeping some last layer of herself untouched. When Nathaniel arrived, he paused in the doorway as though uncertain of his right to cross the threshold. He had removed his coat and cravat, and the top button of his shirt was undone, revealing the vulnerable hollow of his throat. For a moment, he looked less like a lord and more like a man who had been cornered by tradition. His gaze went to the rose petals. Clara watched his mouth tighten. "I gave explicit instructions," he said quietly, "that this would not be done." Clara did not know whether to laugh or cry at the absurdity of him being angry on her behalf. "They meant to honor custom," she replied. Nathaniel stepped closer, his movements deliberate. "Custom," he said, "has a habit of turning people into objects." He reached for the sheet and with one swift, controlled motion, swept the petals to the floor. They fell like blood-red confessions against the pale rug. The gesture was not violent. It was decisive. It stripped the room of pretense. Then he turned to Clara, and the steadiness of his gaze made her feel seen in a way that was almost uncomfortable. "Clara," he said, her name, without title, spoken softly as if testing whether it belonged on his tongue. "You do not owe me anything tonight. Not your body, not your obedience. You have given enough by agreeing to this." Her breath caught because she had prepared herself for dutiful endurance, for an act that would finalize their contract. Instead, he offered her dignity. But she began because society's rules rose automatically in her mind. "The marriage is valid," he said, his voice firm. "And even if it were not, I would rather live with rumor than force." He crossed to the chair and took up a dressing gown laid out by some well-meaning hand. Without asking, but with a gentleness that acknowledged her autonomy, he draped it around her shoulders like a protective mantle. The fabric carried a faint scent, cedar and something warm, like smoke from a hearth. "If you ever want closeness," he said, stepping back to give her space, "it will be because you choose it, not because a vicar spoke words over us." He bowed slightly, an old-fashioned, respectful gesture, and turned toward the door that led to the adjoining room. "I will sleep there," he said. "Good night, Lady Ashcroft." Clara's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Good night, Nathaniel." He paused at the sound of his name, as if surprised she offered it, then nodded once and disappeared. Clara stood alone in the softened candlelight, surrounded by fallen petals that no longer mocked her. Instead, they looked like discarded lies. She sat at the edge of the bed and pressed her hands to her eyes, not from grief, but from the sudden, unexpected ache of being treated with care. What followed was not dramatic. It was slow, deliberate, almost painfully ordinary in the way true change often is. Breakfast became their first shared ritual. Each morning at 8, Clara entered the morning room to find Nathaniel already seated, newspaper folded beside his plate. He rose when she arrived, not extravagantly, but consistently, a quiet courtesy that said, "I see you as my equal here." He poured her tea himself. Their conversation began with practical matters: household needs, estate accounts, Lottie's schooling, upcoming visits from tenants. Yet in those conversations, Clara discovered Nathaniel did not dismiss her opinions. If she suggested changing the staffing of the laundry to ease workloads, he listened. If she proposed moving Lottie's lessons to the brighter library to lift the child's spirits, he approved. The staff watched the dynamic shift with cautious attention. Mrs. Pritchard remained stiffly proper, but the younger maids seemed relieved by Clara's calm authority. Clara, who had grown up watching her mother manage a household like a conductor guiding an orchestra, learned quickly how to claim her place without cruelty. She was firm when needed, kind when possible, and she refused to perform the exaggerated arrogance some expected of a lady. The servants did not love her instantly. Trust did not arrive like a gift. But it began quietly, like a candle flame protected from drafts. Lottie was the true complication. The child was neither openly hostile nor eager. She observed Clara with a seriousness that made Clara feel as though she were being examined for flaws. At first, Lottie addressed her as "my lady" with too perfect politeness, a shield learned from grief and uncertainty. Nathaniel, for his part, was careful around his niece, affectionate in small gestures, tucking a stray curl behind her ear, pressing a hand to her shoulder when she passed. But he carried a reserve that suggested fear of losing her as he had lost others. Clara began by doing what she knew. She taught. She brought Lottie books with brave heroines and curious girls who refused to shrink. She read aloud in the afternoons when the light slanted gold across the rugs. She praised effort rather than perfection. Slowly, Lottie's questions shifted from formal inquiries about lessons to small, personal ones. "Did you like living at Hawthorne?" she asked one day, pretending to focus on her embroidery. "Yes," Clara replied honestly, "but I think I will learn to like it here too." Lottie's needle paused. "People say you married Uncle because you wanted money." The bluntness hit like a slap, not because it was cruel, but because it was true enough to wound. Clara did not scold her. She took a breath and said, "People say many things. Some of them are unkind. Some of them are simple, because simple stories are easier to tell than complicated ones." Lottie's eyes lifted. "What is the complicated one?" Clara's heart tightened. That sometimes, she said, choosing each word with care. Adults make choices to protect the people they love. And sometimes those choices look like something else from the outside. Lottie studied her for a long moment, then returned to her stitching as if the conversation meant nothing. But that night, when Clara tucked her into bed, the child reached out and held her hand for 3 seconds before letting go. It was not a declaration. It was an opening. The household, meanwhile, whispered. It was the way of great houses. Corridors carried secrets like drafts carry cold. Some said Clara was ambitious, climbing above her station. Others said Nathaniel was cold, unwilling to treat his new wife as a true wife. There were murmurs about separate wings, about the lack of public tenderness, about what must be wrong in a marriage that had been arranged with such speed. Clara heard fragments behind pantry doors in the garden as she passed. She kept her spine straight and her expression calm. But at night, alone in her beautiful rooms, the whispers sometimes pressed against her like hands. She had traded one kind of vulnerability for another. At Hawthorne, she had been protected by familiarity. Here, she was protected only by her title, and titles were flimsy shields against loneliness. It was a visit from Nathaniel's aunt that sharpened everything. Lady Morland arrived in late January, sweeping into the hall like a storm wrapped in silk. She was elegant, sharp-eyed, and skilled at turning politeness into a weapon. At tea, she assessed Clara with the cool amusement of a woman who believed she had seen every kind of social maneuver. A remarkable change, Lady Morland remarked, stirring her tea as if stirring trouble. From Miss Whitmore to Lady Ashcroft in less than a fortnight. Clara held her cup steadily. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Lady Morland's gaze slid to Lottie, who sat stiffly upright, then back to Clara. And how fortunate, she continued, that the estate is secured. Though, of course, everyone will wonder whether there will be an heir. The words landed with deliberate weight. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. Nathaniel's voice, when he spoke, carried a rare edge. My household is not a topic for speculation. Lady Morland smiled, as if pleased to have drawn blood. Everything is a topic for speculation, she replied lightly. That is what society is. Later, when the tea service had been cleared and Lottie sent upstairs, a silence fell between Clara and Nathaniel in the drawing room, heavy with what had not been said. Nathaniel stared into the fire, as though he could burn the world away with his gaze. Clara's hands rested on her embroidery, unmoving. Finally, she said quietly, "Your aunt will not be the last to ask." Nathaniel exhaled through his nose, controlled. "I know, and the whispers will grow," Clara added. "Not just about heirs. About us." Nathaniel's eyes flicked to her, then away. "Does it trouble you?" he asked. Clara's honesty surprised even herself. "It troubles me," she said, "that Lottie will hear it. That she will grow up believing love is a performance. That she will learn to measure worth in gossip." Nathaniel's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. "I will not allow it," he said, but his voice sounded less like certainty and more like a promise he was afraid he could not keep. Then sickness came, as it often does in winter, careless and sudden. It began with Lottie's cough, small at first, then deepening into something that stole her breath. Clara found her in the night, curled tight, cheeks burning, eyes glassy with fever. Nathaniel arrived at the same moment, hair disordered, shirt half-buttoned, and for once the calm mask slipped. He looked at Lottie as if the sight of her illness had reopened old wounds. "She's hot," he said, voice rough. Clara moved without hesitation. She ordered water, cloths, willow bark tea, and sent a footman for the doctor despite the snow. She sat at Lottie's bedside, pressing cool compresses to the child's forehead, coaxing sips of tea between trembling lips. Nathaniel hovered at first, frozen by fear, his hands half raised and uncertain, like a man afraid his touch would break what he loved.